Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 19th session of Coffee with Ashish. And today we've got a very special guest with us, Varun Gupta from Zumo.com. And before we get into conversation with him, I just want to recapitulate in terms of, over the last 18 sessions, as you know, we have covered host of travel products, intermediaries, and the entire value chain of travel, tourism, hospitality, and aviation. But if you see specifically talking about, the OTA market or travel technology inspired companies and startups, I mean, we have seen a host of companies from meta search to full blown B2C OTA players to even some startups. And we have seen the kind of competition this market has. And, as early as 2013 or 2014, we had this market saturated in many ways with four, five large players and B2B operators and meta search engines in place. But still, there was a company that dared to enter this crowded market, but with a different play. And we'll get into the details. But whenever I reminiscence of this crowded market and how
Yes.
people would still reach out to investors and raise venture capital, I'm always reminded of a couple of jokes which I'm gonna share with you in the form of cartoon as always to capture that mode. And on the top left, you see, you know, an entrepreneur and a banker and venture capitalist trying to literally crystal ball gaze, which many of us are doing right now to even forecast what's going to happen post COVID. And the bottom left one is one of my favorites from Delbert, where basically the entrepreneur has no idea what he's selling, but he uses a bunch of fancy words like I'm going to use something location based, social media, come cloud on steroids. That sort of conversation I had with a lot of entrepreneurs, and there is money, right? But on that, far right, if you see, that's the kind of challenges you face when you're trying to enter a crowded market, and the barriers to entry may not look a lot, but when you go into details, you will see a lot of issues around technology, product differentiation, and even government regulation and price being determinant in travel, especially where the price is determined entirely by the consumer. And it's an extremely tough play, right? But still, if you see, Gumo.com, and for everybody's, information and knowledge, I might share that Gumo.com was started back in 2015, when they acquired Orbit for close to $6 million, right? And in a matter of just a couple of years, they raised $50 billion again from their parent entity, which was Emerging India. And you might wonder that what was so different about Gumo and why they were able to raise so much of funding in a sort of a Me Too market, which was so crowded, right? But I was reading about Gumo's story, and it's so interesting. And even under Varun's leadership, I think the play which they had was pretty much technology focused. Unlike many companies or many other OTAs, which were travel focused organizations, they were doing offline travel earlier, and they just used technology as an enabler. But I think here was one company which actually made technology as the cornerstone of what they do and the entire backbone. And I read somewhere, Varun, that you spent close to $20 million in a couple of years purely on building technology. And I must tell you, if you haven't seen the homepage of Gumo.com, you should visit it right away. And I can tell you, in my personal capacity, I think it's one of the most cleanest uh, homepage I have seen for any travel company. I have always seen those, dancing and jumbling JavaScript based posters in most travel companies. And here is one travel product I have seen. It's just so clean and neat in the design. And I really personally admire it. And just to give you a quick roundup of numbers, so you might be wondering that Gomo is just 4 5 years old, big deal, but it is a big deal. They already do $250 million in revenues. They've got over a lakh B2B agents on their platform, which is called Get My Trip. They do 1.2 million annual transacting users. They also have a corporate arm, which is called Gumo Business Travel and Gumo Corporate Events, which is the MICE business. And combine both these entities, they serve more than 400 plus corporate customers, and they got presence in 7 cities. And all this thanks to the man we have today, Varun Gupta, who's the CEO of Kumo and being one of the founding members back in 2015-16 when the entity was being set up post acquisition of Orbit. And Varun, we share a common employer. I also used to work for Deloitte in strategy and operations 10 years back. So Varun is a hardcore consultant and an M&A expert. So it's really heartening to see that. And a well-traveled, sort of a global citizen, he has done his, studies from South Africa, and then he traveled across the globe doing a lot of roles around deals, doing M&A deals, doing consulting and Deloitte, KPMG, all the tick in the box for all the large big fours and companies. And then he joined CEO of Kumo. And he's got a host of strategies which he's going to discuss with us. And he's a big fan of M&A himself, we know. And the market, as I see, is extremely ripe for consolidation and M&A activity. So I'm sure he's going to spruce up some action on that. So with this, a very warm welcome to you, Varun, on our show. And with this, I'm going to hand it over to Ashish to have a conversation with you while I sit back and enjoy my coffee.
Thank you, Karthik.
Varun, welcome. Enjoy your coffee. And of course, I have to tell the viewers that you actually have travel in your DNA, with your father being a very senior official in Air India, which I'm sure many people know. But yes, it's a very interesting ride for Kumo and yourself, from a consulting background to a very well-funded startup, going along merrily till COVID hits home. So you tell us. Give us an insight into the journey.
Yeah, thanks, Ashish. And I think I joined Kumo in November 2016, and it's been a tumultuous journey. I think is probably the best word to say right from the start. And a lot of people talk about why travel and what's happened since. And I think back in 2016, I guess we were at the peak of India shining, and India is ripe to become a digital economy, right? Everything was exploding, and anything which had e-commerce or digitization opportunities around it still had a long way to run. I still remember when I decided to take the plunge, the Indian travel market was estimated to be, give or take, $30 billion, and China was estimated to be, give or take, $300 billion. And that was broadly the metric across a lot of industries, right? And between India and China, similar market potential, but India was between 1/10 to 1/8 of what China was.
Right.
And the general view was, well, yes, there will be competition, and there was a lot of competition, and there continues to be a lot of competition. There was a lot of opportunity for someone to come in and build a platform, play a consolidation and roll-up game, and invest in technology. And that was the broad thesis at that point. India was the fastest travel market in the world at that point in time. We were going to open up at least 30 new airports, largest aircraft book on order, large investments in the hotel infrastructure. And the one thing which I think at that time kept India apart and continues to keep India apart is the large domestic market. India has one of its core advantages is that our domestic market is very, very large. We're not as dependent on inbound as a lot of other countries are.
Right.
So there's an inherent demand. And I think we came on board, acquired Orbit, because we wanted to first acquire someone who was a traditional profitable player and see how we could implement technology to improve their processes. And then eventually in 2017, I put up a business plan, raised some funding, which at that point we thought was a lot. But in 2017, well, end of 16, 17, for those of you who keep a record of history, a massive amount of money was invested in the travel sector. Paytm entered the travel sector. Make My Trip raised a lot of money. Yatra got listed. And suddenly the competition amped up, even from when we entered. And then 2017 was, well, we tried to compete. And in 2018, the consolidation wave started. There was one large player who entered the market and started consolidating a lot of assets. And there was still growth happening. And then 2019, we saw a little bit of an economic slowdown towards the second part of last year. We ourselves evaluated the business and said, look, B2C is not really an area that we would like to focus on, simply because the unit economics were not were not clear and continue not to be clear. The margins themselves are shrinking in the business, and because of various regulatory changes, the margins, the GST rules in the business, and the viability of a lot of businesses disappeared, which meant you had to invest more in technology. So I think at the back of 2019, we were actually feeling pretty good with ourselves. We had pruned certain business lines. We had invested a lot of money in technology, and we continue to invest a lot of money in technology because that's a factory, right? I mean, fundamentally, that's what we put money behind. And we were seeing a lot of traction on the ground. And then first week in January, when we started hearing the news of COVID, I think the initial response for me and for a lot of people was, it'll blow over, right? It's another SARS, it's another MERS, it'll be localized. By February, we were getting a little worried. I still remember around Feb 8th when Hong Kong was effectively, travel through Hong Kong was stopped, and we started getting a little worried. And then I guess anyone who's on this call knows what happened from March onwards. I think we're seeing some green shoots now, but fundamentally we are looking at a consolidation story which just got accelerated because of what happened. I still believe that the Indian market will bounce back. There's a large domestic demand for travel which will not go away. It will, whether it takes 6 months, 1 year, 2 years to recover, hard to tell today. But fundamentally, there will be demand for local companies. There are local products and solutions that are required, which the global companies cannot cater to as much as they try. And India is a complex environment. It's not an easy environment to operate in. But fundamentally, where we are today is an environment in which the market size would have shrunk from what it was, and there'll be further consolidation, and that's where we are.
Right. So, there's a part B to the first question, and I'll come back to part B later. But the question I'm going to leave behind with you, you talked about a fundamental shift between B2C to B2B, obviously because of certain reasons. And now with COVID, we all know, and there's no marks for guessing, that the internet penetration has gone through the roof, right? So will we see the B2C model changing? And also we know about investments. We're going to come back to you later on more monies coming in. So will we still be throwing money to acquire customers? So if you're not throwing money to acquire customers, profitability becomes an important aspect. So do you see the B2C traction turning back? But I'll come to that question later. But what I want to know at this moment is that, having said all this, there is India and there is the rest of the world. So is the investors' confidence in India shaken up, or is stronger than the rest of the world? Would people in other countries put their money in India in the travel business more than they would put it in Europe or US or anywhere else?
I think difficult to tell right now. I think anything anyone tells you today, they've got an equal chance of being proved right or wrong in 3 months. But I think there are a couple of fundamental themes I believe existed in India pre-COVID and will continue to invest post-COVID as well. First of all, there isn't a market of this size and scale with such large domestic demand, with such low consumption per capita anywhere else in the world, right? What I mean by consumption per capita is, if every Indian spends, say, $50 per person per year on travel in India, the equivalent of that in China is 500, right? So it's just, they consume a lot more in other markets. And even if the Indian consumption went from, say, 50 to 200, we would still be where China was, say, in 2008, 9, 10, take your pick. But that demand story and that consumer story stays intact. And that story, I don't believe there's any other economy or market in the world which can offer that story. The second part of it is the barriers to entry from an investment perspective are pretty large. It's not a case of, well, I'll open a website and business will start coming. There are local regulations, the cost of technology build out, being compliant with what is required to operate in the market, the customer outreach, the servicing, the working capital. There is a lot of investment that needs to go in. So it's unlikely that new players will enter the market in a hurry. The third part is, I think we're looking at very, very loose monetary policy, a lot of money being pumped into various economies, and very, very low interest rates and very low growth. That money will find its way to look for returns, and eventually, I think the right share will find its way into the Indian travel industry. But the next 6 months are going to be tough.
Yeah. So I come back to part B. So with limited people coming into the B2C space or the online space, as you said, on the investment point of view, with perhaps deep discounting and customer acquisition at any cost being things of the past, internet penetration hitting the roof. So do you see a shift in distribution model in that traditional B2B versus B2C?
Look, the shift is happening, right? And it's been happening for the last 20 years and will continue to happen. Now, the question really becomes is, and when we started the business, my strong belief was that the time to think of a business as in travel distribution, right? We don't run planes, we don't run hotels, we don't drive buses. We're not an operator, we're a distributor. And the time to think of yourself as I'm a B2C versus a B2B versus a corporate, I think the lines are blurring. I think they'll continue to blur. I think there is a pure discount customer-led acquisition model where the product is very, very commoditized. And I tell this story to everyone. Think about it as if you're trying to buy a Delhi-Bombay ticket. The one thing that me or any other travel distributors technology-led offers you is in one interface, I can tell you what all airlines are flying at what times and what the relative prices are. Otherwise, you have to log into 4 airlines, right? Sites and do it individually. And then you have to keep a tally somewhere and then you have to go back. Now imagine you're trying to do Delhi, Bombay, Delhi, and you want to find the cheapest flight. Suddenly now you got to do 8 searches because the combination could be on an Indigo and a Spice or whatever. And then you got to do 2 different transactions, in which time the price may change. So as the complexity of the transaction goes up, and this is a very simple example, it exists across inventory types. As the complexity of the transaction goes up, the relative value that you're delivering goes higher for the customer. And then it's not just about a price game. Then it is about having confidence about what you're buying, who you're buying from, the service that you will get afterwards, etc., etc. And over a period of time, the technology is catching up where essentially most people can give an omni-channel experience, whether you're a retail customer, whether you're a corporate customer or a B2B customer. The technology can cope with all 3 channels in one interface. And that's what we've been building over a period of time. There will always be people who will believe that they can get volume growth through discounting. But that's, as far as I know, it's largely been focused at the low end of the market, and it is largely your domestic one-way transactions. Right. So I think that's really where it's going. And hotels has a slightly different nuance to it, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So I come back to Orbitz. And here was a family-run business, very low on technology. Whatever you imagined out of Gumo, you probably got an antithesis as far as Orbit is concerned, because I knew of the company earlier. So that's one part. How was integrating that into your vision and mindscape? That's number one. And the second to it is, where do you see trade fairs going today with social distances? One of the biggest discussions I have on my show here from people who are in the inbound part of the business, and I asked them, I said, do you still see yourself going for WTM and ITB and shows like that? So the same applies for trade fairs for any product. So what do you say? 2 parts to it, of course.
So look, Orbit, when we acquired it, had three business lines. There was trade fairs, there was MICE, and then there was what people call holidays or FIT packages or leisure. The industry has various names for it, but basically packaged holidays. What we discovered, if I had to outline the business model, in the case of MICE, what you would do is your demand would be confirmed. The customer would say, I want to go to Thailand, 400 people. Then you would go and contract your supply.
Correct.
And then depending on how efficient you were and the level of service you were offering to a customer, you would make the spread between what you charge the customer and what you paid to a supplier, right? But your demand was secured. You didn't take inventory risk as such. Now, a lot of people got into the habit of giving 100% credit, which was a different problem, but thankfully we didn't go down that path. Then there was leisure, which was, well, tell me where you want to go, and then I will find your package price. And unfortunately, in the industry, there's a lot of mis-selling around it, right? That it is cheaper or it's better, when very often it's not. And I think that's where the industry got a little bit of a bad name. When we looked at that business closely, what we realized was, well, there are certain types of destinations/itineraries which are suited to packaging. You want to do a Masai Mara safari, or 12 of you want to go on a trip together, which you cannot do on an FIT basis. But anything where it didn't make sense, where the customer was better off procuring the product on their own, as opposed to in a package format, we walked out of. That left us with trade fairs. And trade fairs, the challenge was you would have to contract inventory a year to 2 years in advance.
Absolutely.
With no certainty of demand.
Yeah.
And the demand preferences were changing. You had to predict how many people would go for how many days to a trade fair.
Although there were a couple of German trade fairs which were pretty popular. Yeah.
They were, but I mean, if you were holding 50 seats and you only managed to sell 30, very hard to send someone for a leisure trip to Frankfurt in October, right? No one wants to go. That inventory becomes practically dead for you. So, plus it's a high touch business. And one of the things we are not very good at is a high touch business. So we actually decided to step out of the trade fairs business almost 2 years ago. The role we were building towards, and maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. I think trade fair events will come back, and we were moving to a model of co-investing with other travel agents. So if you felt that you could fill 20 seats to a plastic show in Germany, then no problem. You put in the cost for 10 seats, and we will put in the cost for 10 seats, and we'll co-market it.
Right.
And we'll build the technology around the experience for the customer to know what is happening, etc. That model was actually beginning to gain a lot of traction because there was a lot of people who had customers who they wanted to take, but they didn't have the volume to fill a coach.
Yeah, couldn't do it on their own. Yeah.
And especially for events where there was an inventory challenge, right? And we could put in the working capital for it because that's where I specialize. Do trade fairs come back post-COVID? I don't know. I certainly hope so. And I think at the end of the day, people need to meet with each other, right? That's how relationships get built.
I mean, today, the biggest question, what is coming back and not coming back is on trade fairs and MICE movements and big gatherings, of course. Rest, people are talking in some form or the other. But we leave that for now because anything else would be a guesswork at this moment. Let's come back. And I've been involved with a few startups myself, having in my journey. And one of the biggest problems you face is, of course, human talents. First of all, to be able to acquire the right kind of people, convince the story that, you're setting up an enterprise which is going to be good for them. And second is retain them and keep acquiring as you go journey. So how's your experience been on human talent?
I think as with every industry mixed, I think there's some great talent in the travel industry. I think the challenge, and the travel industry is probably the most advanced after the banking and financial services industry in terms of technology implementation, because a lot of travel product is bought and sold online today. And there have been some very smart people who built that technology and who've changed the business models as they stand today. I think the one thing that perhaps, if I had to have a criticism about the travel industry, is that there is a bit of a culture of only recruiting people from travel. And over a period of time, the talent pool is not diversified, right? So there might be best practices that exist outside that inevitably don't flow in. And the second challenge has been that, at least for the last 5 years that I've seen, the industry has been at a war with itself, especially the distribution industry, on race to the bottom of the cheapest is best. And if you keep destroying your margins like that, then at the end of the day, it leaves very little room to invest in people. I think, well, we've been trying to make that change. A lot of my core team is not travel; they're actually outside of travel, and we've tried to keep that mix quite balanced. Where there are a lot of nuances to the travel industry, so you need good, solid operating experience of the industry, but to bring best practices from outside. And I think that can work. It's just, I guess people need to have some confidence and faith in hiring people from outside, and then giving them time to train and adapt. And I think that's what's been missing.
Well, Varun, since we have talked so much about technology and what you've done for Gumo and technology, one of the biggest concerns I've had as an industry veteran is that technology, in whichever form, could be digitalization, processes, internal, external, UI, cannot be in few hands. It has to reach the grassroots. It has to be evangelized across the country, especially tier 2, 3, 4, where demand was keeping. How do you get across to the lowest denomination? How do you evangelize it? How do you get adaptation?
If you ask me, I think in the travel industry, technology, whether you take IRCTC or you take the airline business, and increasingly the hotel business also, I think technology is pretty deep, right? If you really think about it in travel distribution, what are you selling? You're selling a confirmation, right? You're selling a voucher, which basically says, here's your confirmation that you can avail of the service. The product that's being delivered is digital, actually. And to be able to deliver it digitally on the grassroots, there is an agent somewhere, and we have about 100,000 agents, like I said, who transact with us, or used to transact with us pre-COVID at various levels, and they would log into a system somewhere in a small town, either on a phone or on a computer. They would look up a price and a fare and availability, agree to the price with the customer, accept the cash, transfer the cash to us digitally, and hand over the booking confirmation slip to the customer. And I've met a lot of these people, and they are ranging from small panwalas to people who had a grocery store, to small-time travel agents, to insurance agents, to home-based agents. There's a whole range of these people, and they're very comfortable using the technology, and it works at scale, right? I actually don't think that's so much of a challenge in India in the travel space. I think the technology is fairly deep. I think if you ask me where the challenge is how do we get we have some of the best travel tech technology in the world, in my opinion. How do we get some of our Indian companies to take that and compete effectively with a Booking or an Expedia, and take one of these brands and make it global?
Right. For sure.
Yeah.
That's one. And if I may add, perhaps these thoughts have become aggravated with me post-COVID, that we got to move away from being purely transactional to slightly more experiential driven, because there are a lot of elements which hotels would probably need to do at the booking end, which they do once you enter the property, be it registration of the form or booking for a dinner or a service or whatever, which needs to come at a user interface level, as they call it, or even at the airports, right? Even if you see the restricted flights, you go out of Delhi, there are a fair amount of manual work which is happening before you enter the airport. Right? So I think all that would, to my mind, somewhere, be it hotel, be it cabs, be it even IRCTC. I know IRCTC is making changes to the API, so the people who are integrated to the API can also make those changes. But COVID is putting that nail in that coffin, so to say. But this is something I've been thinking for the last 2-3 years myself, that why are these not happening to the front end? And why are we staying only technology? So when I use the word evangelizing, I'm also talking about moving beyond this. And the issue has always been everything is left to the online travel company to invest his own money, let him make the user interface. We are giving you a raw API, do what you want to do with it. You know, that's my concern. So a last piece before we move on.
I actually think we've invested in a few companies. So we made a total of 5 investments since I joined Boomo. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work. And then I've had the pleasure of meeting pretty much everyone across the spectrum who's involved in the travel tech space. And there's some wonderful work being done to digitize every aspect of the customer experience, right? If you really take the funnel is you need to start with digitizing the inventory first, right? You need to know that inventory is available and what is the price at which it's available and under what conditions it's available. Now, the airline industry obviously did that 20 years ago. The hotel industry has been doing it, and the big chains have done it, the small chains are doing it, and the independents, some have done it, some haven't done it. The next step is then being able to distribute that inventory effectively, whether through your own channels or through third-party channels. The next part is being able to price it, to be able to say, what should I price it at different channels on? And then the next is being able to accept the booking. And then there's the post-booking flows, right? Getting ready for check-in, getting ready for onboard, and then post-departure flows. It's like a layer cake, right? The airline industry is the most advanced because they digitize their inventory the first.
And the GDS came along sometime.
Correct. So with the other industries, they are at various stages. Now, to be able to get to a point where the customer experience on site is fully digitized, the entire backend has to be digitized.
Yeah.
And that's where the airline industry had no choice but to adopt technology because of the nature of the perishability of the product. So I think what I've seen is in every industry that process is on. It's just how long the process they are and how much investment is available. And also in most cases, it's not the operators themselves that are making those investments. There are third-party technology companies which actually enable these booking systems, these inventory management systems for the operators who are making these investments. Like the travel distribution industry, there's a war going on there also. There's a war for survival right now.
Well, funnily enough, India perhaps must be the only country, before I sign off, I would say that there is something known as a reserve seat versus a non-reserve seat. When 23 million daily seats on railways, there's only 10% of so-called reserve category which can come under a booking platform of IRCTC. For the rest, they have to line up at the platforms.
Yeah.
And the same goes for the bus travel. We were talking to CEO of Redbus. And here was a huge inventory which was non-reserved, which wasn't available on technology platform. You know, and those tickets had to be bought from somewhere. So I think there's a long word ahead even on the inventory part of it, let alone the experience part of it. But I hand you back to Karthik now. And Karthik, if we have any questions from the audience.
Thanks, Ashish. And thanks, Varun, for an insightful discussion. I've got two questions for you. So, as I understand from this whole conversation, and you have to excuse me, I do not come from a travel industry, so also take a outsider's view. So, the way I understand your strategy has been technology-led omni-channel strategy. So, you're using a technology and you want to create a omni-channel play. Now, part one of the question is that similar strategy now other people are also following, and people are investing in technology and they are trying to update themselves. So what kind of differentiator in the near term to midterm you would see once everybody has also matured their technology to a certain scale where they are able to enable this omni-channel strategy with their technology as well? That's one. Second is with whatever is happening in the world with Geo, Facebook, or whether it's Google, Vodafone, Airtel, Amazon, those kind of big sort of groups are forming up, which will ultimately lead to the rise of super apps, as they are calling it, right? Do you think travel on its own would even have a shelf life as an industry, or would it get sort of, it would be one of the drop down options in those super apps?
Well, okay, the first part is what happens when everyone's technology stack matures. I, I think the conversation has to change from, or the outlook has to change from technology being seen as a cost to being seen as an investment, right? I wish there was a day when, and a lot of my investors, and people I work with ask me this, यार वो technology का खर्चा कब खत्म होगा, मतलब कब technology बन जाएगी, when will the technology be done?
Right.
And honestly, I haven't found that day yet, right?
And you ask them for more money, कि और चाहिए upgrade करने के लिए.
When will it be done? There is no such thing.
Right.
There is a peak, and then obviously, once you scale the peak, it gets easier. But it's a continuous investment. Number one. Number two, in that process, there are various pushes and pulls that every company has. So how many of them are able to actually achieve that omni-channel stack that works across multiple channels, and deal with their competing priorities? We'll have to see. I'm not in the business of predicting that. And I'm sure there will be some who will manage it, right? So there will always be competition. And part of that answer always is the competition will be around in every industry in a country like India for the foreseeable future. That's the nature of the economy.
Right.
And while I wish for a world where there was no competition and I was the only one surviving, I doubt in my lifetime I will see that. Then that takes us to the concept of super apps, and yes, there will probably be just a drop down, and that drop down you'll be able to do everything. And again, I think that's a journey that they have to go through. It's to be proven, and like I said, there will be certain low complexity transactions that they will be able to capture, but there will be several scenarios in which you would want to work with a specialist. Beyond a point, how comfortable do I feel calling ICICI to change my flight booking? Just, there is a bit of a conflict there, right? So I think we've seen other forms of this happen. I have no doubt the world will be a different place 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now. And our business model will evolve along with it.
Varun, it's like saying, will I order my food through an online travel company?
Well, someone's certainly trying it right now. So let's see.
Right, yeah. Great. Thanks so much, Varun, for being with us, and thanks Ashish as always, and thanks audience for joining in. And we will also publish the key takeaways from this conversation by tonight. So those of you who want to have a summary of the learnings which Varun has shared, we will share that with you on our Facebook page as well. And we will see you on Thursday again for our 20th session of Coffee with Ashish. And till then, stay safe, stay at home. And thanks again, Varun, for joining us.
Varun, hope people ghumo again.
Yes, so do I.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
coming.
Thank you,
you.
Karthik and Ashish.
Bye.
Bye.